Neil, our judge, for this resolution today, and thank you, my fellow co-debaters, for being here. Going back to what the Leader of Opposition said in regards to outlining our case, because we will be doing that, we still have to acknowledge the fact that that there will be systemic issues involved in terms of bureaucracy. In how the Justice Department, on both the federal and likely state and local level as well, will have to handle the pardoning issue, and also on an individualized in terms of how individual prisoners and their experiences just as a prisoner contribute to this debate, and also in the end. Hopefully, I'll have enough time because I have quite a bit of these. I'll be pointing out flaws and fallacies in the government's reasonings based on the past two speakers that they have had. Now, the first point I want to bring up is that this review of all the cases in terms of how how this will flood our justice system in terms of these pardonings. Yes, there was the issue brought up about computerizing it, but in the end, even though computers help, ultimately it is a drain on actual resources in the Justice Department itself. There actually have to be individuals going through the actual records of these citizens that are in prisoners now. Prisoners that are in federal prisons for their crimes that have to be reviewed, and it cannot be done solely with computers. So this delusion that using computers will somehow erase the idea of government inefficiency in this issue, it's not properly clarified solely based on computers. But perhaps that's a bit more of a criticism than what I would like. Now, going on to the individualized attention. Now, they defined marijuana-related as nonviolent crimes. But let's actually think of the points that have been made so far about this. One of the more interesting ones was that marijuana isn't a threat, and that's completely unrelated to this actual debate. It's an issue of pardoning, not of the legitimacy of marijuana in American society. But the idea that bad habits can be picked up in prison by prisoners, the longer they spend in there, which is why we must acquit all nonviolent offenders immediately because of this law. The thing that's wrong with that kind of reasoning is that it fundamentally is blind to the actual sociological and socioeconomic factors involved in particularly drug-related crime. Passing this law doesn't actually solve the issue of drug-related crime. What it does do is turn a blind eye to the fact that people that start off, that actually use drugs before this was passed, the country was not really that different from what it is now. So because of this, we can't expect that individuals that came from more urban areas, a little more economically depressed areas, that are more prone to using and abusing not just marijuana but say other drugs as well, that they are prone to, due to these socioeconomic factors, to other crimes as well, and definitely violent ones should be included in there. And also the idea that staying in prison longer may expose you to more bad habits. Well, that completely flies in the face of our progressive punishment system. Someone who kills someone should, by definition, get a longer sentence than someone who parked the wrong way, right? That is to say that the longer someone spends in prison, yes, there are bad habits in prison, but that's not to say that we should somehow pardon people because of that. And also, one of the more interesting points, now moving on to more of a criticism, is that I thought the criminals weren't actually criminals because they passed this law and the government is saying that we should pardon them. But if they were in the prison, and people in prisons have been rather oddly all blanketed with bad people in there, these bad habits, I thought they weren't prisoners. So that kind of a clarification is required if we're going to have an actual enlightened debate about this. And one of the overtones I found in the 8 minutes made by the member of government was this idea of the ends justifying the means. Where else in our society do we actually even use that kind of reasoning? The ends justifying the means. And we've seen in history, very recent history, that ends justifying the means is a dangerous, slippery slope in justice specifically, but also in other areas, law and sociology, culture, ethics, etc. And perhaps this is symptomatic of what appears to be a lack of compassion on the part of the government. They see the prisoners only as, in terms of when they release them into the general population, as a tax source. Is that a joke? That we release people back into society as tax sources, as a source of money for the government. That seems like a rather un-American view of citizens. What we should be focusing on in our prison system, and this is my last 90 seconds, so I think I'll provide some points of reform. What it should be focusing on, not full pardon everyone, but look at this from a more relative view, because I think it's rather childish to view this as a black or white issue where there's no nuance from prisoner to prisoner. That is to say that we can't completely say everyone is innocent in nonviolent, simply because we have to take into account other factors in their lives. Judges have been doing it for quite a while in terms of how often they mete out more harsh penalties, and among other things. And so, in my closing 20 seconds, I'd like you to consider, Mr. Judge, that this idea of giving everyone arrested for these nonviolent possession crimes, while slightly on the superficially looking like a good idea to fully pardon them, it's a very black and white, polarized view that really undermines our justice system, and we hope that you take that into account when making your decision.